You're watching GrassRoots TV.
The Aspen Writers Foundation, host of this program, has been bringing readers and writers together since 1976. To become a member, please contact the Aspen Writers Foundation at 925-3122 or online at aspenwriters.org.
Welcome to AWF Reads, the book discussion program sponsored by the Aspen Writers Foundation. My name is Paul Andersen. I'm your host today for a discussion of The Future of Life by Edward O. Wilson, E.O. Wilson. This book is a survival manual, not just for humanity, but for the intricate web of life that makes humanity possible. Coming from one of the most renowned scientists in the world and a two-time Pulitzer Prize-winning author, The Future of Life establishes wildlands conservation as one of the most pressing concerns of the day. Delving into natural science with a philosophical and moral bent, E.O. Wilson dispels the notion that human technology alone can preserve the biodiversity of the planet on which all life depends. Instead, he puts the responsibility squarely on everyone's shoulders as he calls for a global awakening to the complexity of fragile ecosystems that are imperiled by human growth and industry. This book, published in 2002, coins the word biophilia as a mandate for the love of all life. Wilson makes the intricate mysteries of the natural world understandable and pertinent in a powerful literary achievement. Before we launch into the discussion, I'd like to introduce my panelists and welcome them. On my right is Olivia Siegel. Olivia works full-time at ACES as a naturalist and development director. She grew up in California, attended Brandeis University, and has been in Aspen for 3 years. She loves rock climbing, hiking, and skiing. Next to Olivia is Tim McFlynn, a professional mediator and arbitrator. He is also board chairman and co-founder of Pitkin County Open Space and Trails Program. He serves as board president of the Wilderness Workshop, and he lives on a small horse ranch in Old Snowmass. Sue Edelstein, next to Tim, has lived in Carbondale for 7 years, a former real estate broker and national park superintendent. She is active in the local community, including serving on the board of the Aspen Valley Land Trust, where she is an ardent supporter of the preservation and use of open space. My own background, I'm a journalist, author, and interpretive nature guide for the Aspen Institute, and volunteer moderator for discussions like this for the Aspen Writers Foundation. Welcome. This book really begins with its cover. The cover illustration reveals a beautiful representation of 61 species and races, all of which are extinct today. In this lies the cautionary message of this book, The Future of Life. In Wilson's prologue, he writes it as a letter to Thoreau, celebrating Henry David for hitting upon an ethic regarding man's relationship to the natural world. That ethic is stated in the famous dictum, "In wildness is the preservation of the world." Wilson warns that an Armageddon is approaching. He says, not the cosmic war and fiery collapse of mankind foretold in Scripture, but the wreckage of the planet by an exuberantly plentiful and ingenious humanity. He talks about humanity facing a bottleneck, and that this is a serious time for us. And so my opening question for the panel, what does he mean by a bottleneck, and why should we care? And just launch in anybody who wants to talk.
I think part of what he's talking about as a bottleneck is that we have hit a point where population growth and resource extraction and species extinction put together, if they continue at the rate that they are, we're toast. And so this is the point at which, or the point in 2002 when he wrote this book, he was saying this is the point at which we have to start changing how we live if we want to survive as a species. That we can't wait 20 years or 30 years to start changing. That's too late.
I think I would certainly agree, and I thought it was an amazing choice of words to title that chapter The Bottleneck, because it's a gentle, sort of calm way of looking at what is really a critical time in human history. It's way more than a bottleneck. But he calls it a bottleneck because he sees Homo sapiens as just one more species. And he sees that in 1 million years, the rate of extinction of species has gone up, according to his calculations, somewhere between 1,000 and 10,000 fold since man came on the scene. And he sees in a pretty hopeful way, I think, that man has the ability to reverse that decline or not. And the bottleneck, I think, is something that usually is not permanent. We think of bottlenecks in traffic, or, you know, they clog up and then they open. And I like the choice of words.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I like the idea that he presents. You know, part of what has made the human species so powerful and caused the extinction of so many other species is our use of culture to adapt to environments, as opposed to our use of genetic evolution. And that's terrifying, but it's also encouraging, because he implies, I think, that we can then use that ability to adapt by culture to solve these problems as well.
Yeah, he excuse me. He says that the Earth is a finite place. That it's not a cornucopia. It can't just continue to produce and produce without some imbalance occurring. And that's the bottleneck that we're facing. Is this precarious point of imbalance? He says that the Earth is delicate. That the biosphere is at risk. Is the Earth that delicate? That is the balance so precarious?
Well, I think back to the bottleneck, he's really saying that as an evolutionary biologist, as a scientist, it takes millions of years for adaptation to create solutions to environmental or other crises. He sees this particular era, the 21st century, as a very short amount of time, not for evolution to take care of things, but for man to recognize that it is a dire time to use all of the technology and science available to survive. I mean, I really think he's talking about survival of this species, the four of us.
So the change is accelerated now. It's accelerated beyond
In 1
any
century.
historical precedent,
Yeah.
and nature can't really pace with it.
Right.
Right, and when you have really healthy, intact tracts of land and ecosystems, that means that those species and those habitats have a greater ability to deal with change. And that we're now in a situation where so many species have disappeared, and so many areas of habitat have shrunk and disappeared, that the Earth no longer has sort of that buffer in which to deal with change.
Why does Wilson place so much import on species? I mean, he has 61 on the cover of this book that are extinct. Why should we care if a few species go extinct? What's Wilson's argument here?
Well, one of them, I think, and I found it compelling, fascinating, was looking at how few of the species that are out there have even been identified, cataloged, given a scientific name, and how few of those are pivotal to food production, which is to say to nurture humankind, and to healthcare, to the discovery of medicines. It's a very small amount, and obviously, for practical reasons, we need to be concerned about continuing to have all of those out there so that food production and healthcare for humankind can continue to flourish rather than fail. I mean, that's at least one of the reasons.
Yeah, so there's a pragmatic
Very
thing.
one pragmatic reason, yeah.
It's not really an ideology that he's speaking as a scientist there. But he also speaks as an ideologue, doesn't he? And this is this unusual blend for Wilson, going from really, I would say, scientist to philosopher. Does that work in this book?
It made me crazy,
How?
to
Why?
be honest.
Yeah.
I found it fascinating, actually, practically, and there are very practical aspects to his writing. I agree with almost everything he said in terms of the roadmap he laid out for what we need to do, what the real problems are, yet he was coming from a place saying it's a moral imperative that we do this. It's the ethical thing to do, and humankind can be ethical if properly prodded. I'd love to believe that, but actually I think people are pretty self-interested, and it's the way humankind is, it's the way the organizations that humankind creates work, and I think the same goals can be accomplished by showing people that their self-interest really lies in environmental preservation. But there's a streak through here of just, I think, totally raving idealism that I don't think will be what motivates us to get to the right place. Tempered by very practical plans.
Right. He offers a counterpoint, though, in his chapter about what's the biosphere worth, which I found a really interesting argument, to actually put a dollar figure on the biosphere. And I think it was $33 trillion. And this is in 2002. And I think he was looking at 1997 figures. But still, to put a dollar sign on the services that the biosphere provides us, it's what was it, double the global GDP, gross domestic product.
And I'm sure it's much more now.
And it's probably more, yeah. And yet, why isn't that on the balance sheets today in our corporate and government functions?
You know, for the first time, I think it's crawling onto them when we talk about carbon taxes and carbon credits, and it's the first step.
Yeah.
And I think Sue is correct that he is definitely an idealist in his view of the moral imperative. I think it will be self-interest that will determine how we respond. But I think it's happening. It's happening all around us. It's happening in this valley. It's happening in many parts of the world. Last week, Portugal was featured on the front of the Sunday New York Times about its transition to renewable energy ahead of every country in that continent. And so it's happening, but I think it's happening because the entrepreneurs, the venture capitalists, the opportunities, the new energy economy, our day happening in this valley this week, is all around us.
Just a note for our viewers, we're speaking now in August, and this show will air later, so just to give Tim's timing. So yeah, this summer, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of progress visible. Wilson, though, I think he uses a spiritual argument, and he connects it with a religious belief that all life has inalienable rights. I would argue that the moral imperative, it holds for a lot of people. But Sue, I agree with you that in pragmatic, political, and in the corporate world, certainly, it is a dollar sign and it's self-interest that really is going to promote these changes.
And I think there's nothing wrong with idealism, and idealism often precedes practicality in any movement. So I'm not knocking it. I find this a very curious and interesting mix.
Yeah.
In the last paragraph, he was going right along talking about practical things and we can do it. And then the last sentence he adds in religion and cosmic, and I'm going,
Right.
Right. But I would maybe suggest that, he wrote this in 2002, 8 years later. If I were him, having written this book and feeling like there's something that needs to happen, that sense of urgency, I think that our valley is really incredible in terms of the organizations that we have and the work that they do and the level of consciousness in our community. I would argue that's maybe not representative of the whole country, and I think that far too little has happened on his solutions path compared to where we should be at this point.
On a scaling, on the kind of scaling that it requires.
Yeah.
And that if you take the title, The Future of Life, that's pretty riveting. But for me, he talked about why biodiversity matters in a way I could understand. Mm-hmm. It was a 189-page small format book with compelling examples. And despite the work I do, I didn't really understand until I read this book how important it is.
The work you do as a conservationist.
Yeah, just
right.
My work. But how do we get, thanks to your show, some people might pick up this book. But the key to me is the information gap. How do you close it? How do you get millions of people, this is not a hard book to read, to embrace this window of opportunity that he sees?
Tim, just to direct something to you, you're the chairman of the board of the Wilderness Workshop. The Hidden Gems campaign, how would Wilson feel about that?
Well, obviously, he sees the preservation of especially lower elevation lands and large intact lands as essential to species movement, reproduction, genetic diversity, healthy herds of this or that, whether they're elk or ants or whatever. He would see that as very important. And when I said it, I didn't appreciate it until literally I read this book, what it really meant to me and to humankind to have this population explosion in the world. I knew what it meant in terms of hunger, lack of food, disease, but not in terms of biodiversity. I really urge everybody to pick this book up. But it's 8 years later. We need this message to be packaged for everyone.
I found myself writing hidden gems in the margin in a couple places because really the express purpose of hidden gems is just what you were saying, preservation of mid-level lands for animal populations to move through and for biodiversity. And that is very expressly what Hidden Gems is all about.
It is. The early wilderness that surrounds us was the low-hanging fruit, and it's rocks and ice. And if you think about the richness of the lower elevation lands, that's where it really matters. And it's also tough.
Wilson offers a chapter called Solutions. And so he's not just a doomsayer, which some might equate him with, but he offers really, I think, viable and interesting solutions. Can we review some of those? Does anybody want to bring any of those up?
I was totally shocked to hear him supporting the use of genetically modified crops.
Surprised me too.
I don't necessarily know where I land on that issue, but I was surprised to get that perspective from him.
So it seems like a contradiction between his sort of purist idealism and welcoming science into the genetic structure of life.
And he's respectful and lists the reasons why genetically engineered or modified plants or animals is a subject of not just controversy, but a lot of activism around the world. He's respectful of that. But as a scientist, he sees more promise than problems there.
What are as a conservationist, he obviously advocates conservation. What's his top priority to conserve? What type of landscape or system?
I think what he talked about toward the beginning and then went back to at the beginning of that last chapter is his goal is the sustainability of human life at a level where a supportable level of population has a reasonable and healthy quality of life. So, and that's why I said I keep going back and forth, because on the one hand he seems like such an idealist, and on the other hand that's very practical. How he, on the one hand, he'll, people will talk about human beings being transplanted species that don't belong, and on the other hand he's saying, but we have to preserve people. And the bottom line is a reasonable number of people, a good quality of life, and here's the science that we need to do to get there.
And it seemed like he was very focused on habitat, and a specific kind of habitat, large unbroken tracts. He spent a lot of time talking about projects around the world that connected nature preserves into really expansive areas, and part of that being, the number of species that can survive in an area is exponentially related to the size of the preserve that they're in.
Right, like mega preserves, like the rewilding proposals that are going around to establish huge regions. But he also talked about biodiversity hotspots. What is a biodiversity hotspot? Can anyone just sort of describe it?
The areas of the world that are still intact and have the highest concentration of biodiversity. So those are primarily the rainforests along the equator.
Right. And Wilson puts a figure on how much it would cost to save those areas.
And it didn't seem like that much money in the big picture.
$30 billion could buy and conserve those areas to preserve really the genetic library that he's talking about that we so desperately need to conserve.
And that's 2002, but
Yeah.
so it's 100 billion today.
Yeah, right.
I mean, easy to say, so it's 100 billion, but in the big picture, it's not a ton of money.
Well, he sees, I think it was 50% of all species are on 6% of the landmass of the planet as a function of 4 or 5 natural conditions, obviously water, sunlight being the 2 greatest. I thought he had a great line early in the book about biological geography, where he basically, and it comes back to later talking about is there life on Mars or elsewhere in the universe, and he basically says if there's liquid water, organic material, and a source of energy, you can have life. And obviously the tropics are the best example of that on this planet.
What is biophilia, and why is it important that he brings that out in this book?
I'll take a stab at what is biophilia.
Did he invent that word?
Yeah, I think he did.
I think he did,
yeah.
too.
Yeah, and I haven't decided yet if I buy it, but I think what he's saying is that we originated from the savannas, and genetically the savannas are what we're comfortable with, and we will sacrifice any other kind of ecosystem as a species to create savanna-like conditions. Does that wash?
Yeah.
So is man an invasive species if we came from a savanna?
I think he would say probably yes.
Oh, I can't buy that.
I don't, well, I'm just saying, he uses the term, which is pretty strong, serial killer, in this book.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
you know, it's a fairly recent species, and it has spread throughout the planet, and it is causing the decline of millions of other species. So is that...
But is that natural
it's natural.
selection?
Well, I think invasive species are natural. We have them here. They're everywhere.
I mean, some came on boats or planes, and are they more invasive, or were brought in to solve a biological problem. Mankind spread naturally, although it did need boats and planes to get across the ocean. But to talk about mankind as an invasive species and then to turn around and say, but the whole point of saving biodiversity is to save mankind. You know, on the one hand, he's talking about every species is equal, and on the other hand, the bottom line is to save mankind.
Yeah.
We're running a little low on time, but I just wanted to make a couple of points and then ask a final question. Climate change obviously is going to have a huge impact on the natural world, and the migration of species, if there aren't ecosystems for them to inhabit, then they're lost. So there is an urgency to what he's saying. Is environmentalism radical, according to Wilson?
I don't think so, according to Wilson. I think he, in fact, my memory of his history is that he was not really an environmentalist through much of his career as a scientist, and he thought environmentalists were a little radical, were a little too activist. I think he sees that differently as he's gotten older, and he sees the messages that they were conveying was very helpful for everyone to appreciate where we are now.
And I think maybe what caused that is he talks a lot about, we didn't mention this, he talks a lot about technology, and that the rapid growth of technology is making environmentalism necessary.
I want to, you talked about the cover, the quote he chose, and he probably had 1,000 to choose from on the flyleaf, was John Sawhill, who was president of the Nature Conservancy in the 90s, the decade before he wrote the book. And the quote is, "In the end, our society will be defined not only by what we create, but by what we refuse to destroy." And that's really the Thoreau quote, 100 years later.
Thank you. We're out of time, and I just want to thank my panelists, Olivia, Tim, and Sue, and thank you, viewers, for joining us. Please tune in on another AWF Reads program, underwritten by the Aspen Writers Conference. Meanwhile, this is Paul Andersen saying goodbye and good reading.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's
The Aspen Writers Foundation, host of this program, has been bringing readers and writers together since 1976. To become a member, please contact the Aspen Writers Foundation at 925-3122 or online at aspenwriters.org.